Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
And I'm Femi OK. On March the 8th, thousands in the US plan to take part in a general strike in observance of International Women's Day, known as a day without a woman.
But does this movement have what it takes to be effective? We'll ask the organizers today on The Stream.
I'm Megan Francis, a political science professor at the University of Washington, and I'm in The Stream.
It's been just over a month since hundreds of thousands of people around the world took to the streets in protests of US President Donald Trump's inauguration. It became known as the Women's March. Their mission? To resist efforts by President Trump to change any social policy, particularly those that impact women, minorities and the LGBT community. What followed next were calls for massive general strikes throughout the year.
The first, a Day Without Immigrants, was held in February in the United States and ended in part with several workers who participated in the strike losing their jobs. Now, as women in the U.S. and around the world prepare for a labor strike, does their movement have the ingredients for success? Well, here to discuss that, we have in Chicago, Illinois, Ai-jen Poo. She's the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. In New York, Lemise Deek, a human rights attorney and a member of the National Planning Committee for the Women's Strike.
In New Haven, Connecticut, Jennifer Klein. She's a professor of history at Yale University, and her research spans the fields of U.S. labor history and social movements. And in Los Angeles, California, Rick Wartzman. He's a senior advisor at the LIGHTROCKET Institute. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. Ai-jen, March the 8th, you are going to be out there, making your mark, being part of this International Women's Strike. Why?
I work with a workforce of domestic workers who care for the most important elements of our lives every day, our kids, our aging loved ones, our homes, and yet they're some of the most undervalued and vulnerable workers in our entire economy. In fact, for home care workers who care for our elderly, the annual median income is $13,000 per year, which is an impossible amount of money to survive on in this country. And so part of what we're doing is really bringing attention to the incredible work that women are doing every day to hold up this economy and the way in which much of women's work is undervalued and still vulnerable.
Lemise, I'm just going to show people a Google map of where the marches are happening around the world. Some of them that have actually made known and they're official, and we start in Asia and then head all the way across to North America, South America. Amongst here are some of the marches, some of the organizations that you have actually helped put together. If I asked you, what exactly is it that is happening tomorrow? Is it a strike?
Well, in some places it is, yes. It was not our intention, and the organizers didn't actually call for a strike. We're talking about the U.S. National Committee, even though it has been called that, because we didn't have the resources and we understood people's limitations. However, what is happening tomorrow, I think, is the escalation of demands upon this government and even globally for recognition and redistribution of resources that acknowledge and recognize and properly value the non-traditional labor that Ai-jen was talking about just a second ago, and empowering women and normalizing and bringing into collective consciousness the means by which we are able to make demands and compel a response to those demands.
What do you mean by normalizing?
Well, people have, I think that there's been a bit of demonization or maligning of what it means to strike, and that's come in part as a result of laws which have actually made it illegal for some unions to strike. And so we want it to become something that people resort to as a tactic, as a means of asserting power, and not simply depending on lobbying, for example, but and as an escalated form of protest that has the capacity to cause direct change.
I want to share a tweet here we got, because I hear what you said, Lemise, and in some circles, strikes have been villainized and demonized. Alicia here, though, is talking about who will be able to participate in March 8th's Day of Action. She says this is really for those of us privileged enough to be able to take off from work. We also got that same comment, that same perspective from someone who sent us a video comment. This is Maureen Shaw, and this is what she told us.
I also think striking from unpaid labor is going to be very difficult. As a mom to two very small children who rely on me for everything, it's just simply not possible. I don't have the extended support network I would need in order to be out there striking. And I'm sure that holds true for many, many, many other moms who would love to abdicate their parenting responsibilities for the day.
So Jennifer, I want to pass that over to you, because when we talk about who is going to take part, who will this affect, this is the perspective we're getting back.
I think actually one of the most exciting things that's been happening in terms of labor resistance and labor militancy has come out of precisely the low wage and insecure sectors like fast food workers and Walmart workers and other kinds of retail workers. And they are actually being very creative precisely because in some ways they're not hemmed in by the restrictive nature of American labor law at this point. And also the way in which immigrants, starting in 2006, reclaimed May Day, which we have not celebrated as Labor Day since the late 19th century. And they made it their day to march and to try to be out in public. Now, that's not to say that people aren't exposed and aren't vulnerable, but I think we're at a moment where we're trying to figure out what are the new forms of solidarity that we are going to create to reinvent feminism, because it's clear that the kind of lean in, shatter the glass ceiling feminism is a feminism of the elite, whether in the corporate realm or in the political realm. And so I think we need to create a feminism, again, around labor rights. And it is going to be around these jobs. I mean, I think one of the big political misrepresentations of the recent campaign was with all of Donald Trump's blustering about manufacturing jobs. We weren't really talking about the vast number of jobs that people do in the economy, which is working in hospitals and nursing homes and restaurants and all kinds of food service. And so we have to recognize that these are people's real economic lives, and we have to promote those interests.
Lumise, what did you want to add?
Yes.
I hear you, Rick. I'll come to you straight after Lumise.
Yeah. Sure. That argument really erases the women who have been the most targeted, who have also been the most active. Two of our coordinating committee members, Titi Bhattacharya and Chinzia, wrote a brilliant article which highlights that it's always the working women, the targeted women, the women who have been leading, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, who have been at Standing Rock, who have been working in the factories. The teachers are walking out. We have unions from across the country involved. So it's the women who are the less privileged, actually, that are participating. We have undocumented restaurant workers, taxi drivers, all sorts of people involved in it, and it concerns us that this is being made into something of privilege. Aside from the fact that we are not calling for a strike, we see this as an embryonic beginning to the mobilization, hopefully, of larger strikes, and it is society.
So why would it be called the International Women's Strike if you're not calling it a strike?
Those social provisions, that's the issue. All right. It's not us who has to provide that.
So maybe the International Women's Strike is not the right name. Rick, hello.
Yes, hello. I had to offer a couple of thoughts and to echo a little bit of what Jennifer said. I think she's right on. I mean, in many ways. And I also do share some concerns about what is called a strike, what is not, and it's for this reason. Women do make up a majority of low-wage work in this country. There are about 25 million workers who make, $10.50 or less an hour. 2/3 of them are women, and they are vulnerable to a great degree when they go out. And I think what's essential is, and I was really pleased to hear that this action in particular has involved unions and has involved workers' rights organizations. There have been at least one other general strike, so-called general strike, a few weeks ago, the Strike for Democracy that was organized online that didn't involve any workers' rights groups or labor groups. And my concern was, while I totally agreed with its aims, and I've marched myself at several anti-Trump and Trump administration marches, my concern was that that would leave workers vulnerable because there weren't folks who are expert in protecting their rights as part of it.
And you're not the only one with that concern. This is actually a video comment we got from Alex Gorovich. He's an assistant professor of political science at Brown University, and this is his concern.
So the women's strike is a great thing for what it is. It's a demonstration strike. And demonstration strikes don't really exercise power by shutting down production. They are acts of publicity and protest. They are a peaceful show of force for a day and can help build solidarity for future struggles, and I think that's the real potential of the women's strike. I'm a little bit more skeptical of the claim that the women's strike is reclaiming the revolutionary sort of heritage of the past by striking, because mass and general strikes are primarily led by the working class. They exercise power by shutting down production for days and even weeks, and they are much more threatening than a one-day demonstration strike. And for that reason, they often face quite violent repression. They are very serious. They demand really sustained and careful organization and serious sacrifice by its participants. It's fine that that's not what's happening tomorrow, but it is worth distinguishing the two so that we can take the measure of what happened.
So Ai-jen, he shared his concerns there, and they kind of echoed Rick's, but he also said that he does think this could help build solidarity for future struggles. And so that's a sentiment we got on Twitter. This is Neslihan, who says, strikes are necessary when all else fails. They make us notice people who work hard to bring services to us. Do you see that as a tangible result of what could happen after March 8th?
I do. I think that this is an important moment for us to recognize the incredible contributions that women make to this economy. Women are almost half of the entire workforce. We provide more than 70% of the family care work that supports children and older people so that the adult age workforce can participate in the workforce. And we're 70% or more of the consumer base in this country. And that's an incredible amount of power. And the idea that we could, for a day, take a moment to imagine, understand that power, and think about how we might channel it to make this economy work better for women, for everyone, is an incredibly empowering and important step forward for us in this movement.
And let's.
And I would also just add that for low-wage workers like domestic workers to be able to really think about, domestic work is so undervalued in our economy, for example, that I often ask domestic workers in our movement to imagine what if one day every domestic worker that works in, for example, a city like New York were to decide to not go to work one day? What would happen to every sector of the economy, whether it's, lawyers or doctors or people in education throughout business? There probably isn't a single sector of the economy that wouldn't be affected. And to imagine the collective force and impact of that is incredibly empowering. And we need that collective confidence in order to achieve our goals long term, no matter what. So we think that that's an important part of what tomorrow is about, in addition to generating the solidarity that it inevitably will and already has.
And I mean, let's remember that it's taking place on a weekday. I think in our modern political culture, we've moved all of our protests to Saturdays or Sundays, but it's significant that we're having this on a weekday when people would have to go to work and not go to work. Now, again, I don't think there's going to be an immediate programmatic or policy outcome from it, but we are taking the steps to try to figure out what kinds of solidarities are necessary. And if we go back historically, first of all, women trade unionists have always struggled since the 19th century and throughout the course of the 20th century to figure out how they're going to link the question of paid and unpaid labor in the types of political demands that they articulate, as well as the economic demands that they articulate. And therefore, they realized that they needed an economic strategy through unions and collective bargaining, as well as supportive political policies. So being able to put that together in strikes are really powerful. But the other thing I would add is if we look historically, certainly women have been important in the major industrial strikes ever since women went to work in the Lowell textile factories of the 1840s. And they struck as cigar makers in the 1870s, as garment workers in the early 20th century, as textile workers.
And Jennifer,
but we also, again, have to look at where women really work.
Those women were striking
laborers.
for specific conditions and pay.
Well, this is actually one of the things
are we looking at a very different kind of action, social justice action now?
Because I think they were also striking for policies of minimum wages, of maximum hours, which eventually came to fruition in the New Deal with the Fair Labor Standards Act. And also, if we look at where did women work, they worked still predominantly in service jobs.
All right, let me just share this thought with you, Rick. I'm reading your headline back to you. You know your headline. Okay. Protesters shouldn't toss around the word strike so lightly.
Right. So what I was speaking to there again was this specific action of a few weeks ago that turned out, in my understanding anyway, to be very small in the scheme of things. And I would suspect tomorrow's action to be much, much larger and more significant. I think that the Women's March and International Women's Day promises a much greater action, and that scale is hugely important. It's important as a piece of this larger movement. Progressive movement that's happening. It's important in its own right for all the reasons that were just articulated as to why there needs to be this focus on women's rights and women's labor and their contribution. What I think may be happening here is that the term general strike is in transition, and transitions are messy. So at least in the United States, right, and Jennifer knows this history very well, when you go back, there really hasn't been a classic general strike. I think the last one was in 1946 in Oakland. And interestingly, it involved originally several hundred, mostly women retail clerks going out on strike and then being joined by about 130,000 others in Oakland, other workers that shut down the city for a couple of days. And so we're in a transition period where it was around a single industry or company and then often joined in by others in solidarity. But that was made essentially illegal by labor law in the US, by the Taft-Hartley Act. And now we're in a transition where I think it means something else. And it's become more of a movement, and we're in this exploration stage as to how that can be leveraged in a non-traditional way. And that's fine. I just think we're in a transition.
So I like that because I think that's a really good.
I
just want to get this in here because I like what Rick mentioned about this being a transition phase. There's something online that might help that argument. This is Liran on Facebook who says, "I believe strikes need to be disruptive to be effective." In Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, he discusses the impact of general strikes and how it makes others realize how disruptive the issues you're facing can be. So it's that idea of disruption that people are picking up on. This is a tweet from one person who says, "A strike that isn't disruptive is just entertainment. It does nothing to demonstrate the necessity of the service being struck." So Lamise, I want to go to you with that and thinking of this being a transitional idea. Do we look at strikes as being effective if they are or are not disruptive? And does it have to mean violence?
Well, absolutely. I'm not sure why violence would have any part in this unless we're talking about state violence or corporate violence. I do want to point out the fact that, there are schools that have been forced to shut down. In Virginia, for example, because over 300 women were participating in this action, which has been called a strike because some places and some people are striking, and we've opened it up for other actions. For us, we already see this.
There's some schools.
Just a quick point.
Yeah, I'm just actually illustrating what you're saying, Lamise. So I'm going to join in with you. There are some schools here where they've noticed that so many staff members, this is in Alexandra City Public Schools, they know so many staff members were taking the day off that they actually couldn't run the district schools. So the schools allowed their teachers to take the day off to be part of a day without women, which is kind of solidarity coming from the school district. Or is that disruption? What would you say it was? Solidarity, disruption?
I think it's Well, it's disruption because they were forced to do that in response to the absence of labor. But this just goes to the point that, not only are we in transition, but I think that this is something that people are beginning to think about anew in different ways, in light of all of the repressive laws that have been, executed since the times when people were striking, number one. Number two, we still see this as a victory because we're here right now having this conversation, which I don't even remember the last time, if ever, this conversation was had on Al Jazeera or the news in general. The amount of press coverage that's been given to the idea of strikes and to the history of strikes and to the power of strikes, which was highlighted, by the way, and interestingly enough, at the time of the first Muslim ban, when we saw corporations and taking to the streets in solidarity against an executive order banning Muslims only because they were afraid of losing their labor. So I think that people are putting this together, that we're having this conversation, is indeed a victory. And all of that not only disrupts the general, labor when we're talking about the strikes or the corporation or the corporations being involved, but it disrupts the consciousness and the culture that's been forced upon us.
I want to talk about working. I want to talk about working women. Aijen, just give me a moment, if I may, because there's so much to talk about. Luckily, we have a post show, so we can take us some of our conversation there. Aijen, but I wanted to talk about actual workers. We're talking about philosophy behind the action and transitioning from what a strike used to mean to what it means now. But your domestic workers that you actually represent, who will be out striking, what are their stories that we need to know and remember?
Well, there will be a number of people who will be joining in a rally in Washington, D.C. called Women Workers Rise, together with other low-wage workers, restaurant workers, retail workers, like workers who work for Walmart, and really highlighting the work that women do in minimum wage jobs, working incredibly hard in this economy and still not able to pay the rent or make ends meet for their families. And for many of the women in my workforce, for example, a woman named Jeanette she's a house cleaner in Denver and has been in this country for many years and has 4 children, and she's been forced into sanctuary in the First Unitarian Church in Denver because of the president's executive actions that target immigrants. And many of the communities that our workers are a part of are prime targets that have been terrorized by the immigration raids and deportations that this administration has launched and will be on the front lines when he increases his deportation force by 10,000 or 15,000 fold. And so we are not only talking about the role and the importance of women in the economy, but the incredible vulnerability of many women, immigrant women, Muslim women, transgender women, women with disabilities, who are going to be caught in the crosshairs of an incredibly dangerous administration. And we want to stand together. We'll all be wearing red. Many domestic workers will not be able to strike, but everyone will be participating in a day without a woman, no matter what, because this is about standing together, being powerful together, and asserting the power of our solidarity.
Thank you so much for reminding us where we're going back to. Jennifer, absolutely, I'm going to take you to the post show because I don't want to squeeze you into a couple of seconds. I do have time, though, to show you why the International Women's Strike is actually happening. Have a look here on this Facebook page.
I'm striking on March 8th.
I'm striking on March 8th.
I'm striking on March 8th. I'm striking on March 8th
because I believe women should be free to make the decisions regarding their own bodies.
I'm striking on March 8th.
For equal pay and equal opportunity.
Because women's work makes all other work possible.
And because it's about time we start valuing women's labor.
It's for those reasons that people online are hopeful this will bring people together to form a greater whole and remind leaders that we're still here.
We have guests who have so much more to say. Thank goodness we have the post show. If you're online, go to stream.aljazeera.com and we will pick up there. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Hello guests, welcome back. Doesn't half an hour go so fast? And when you've got half an hour with impressive guests, it is not long enough. What I wanted to do was to give everybody who's watching this a takeaway. So we have the Day Without a Woman action that's happening on March the 8th. What should we be looking for next, Rick? What should be our takeaway? I'm going to ask every single person this, so be thinking about what's the last thought you want to share with us on this topic. For now, Rick, go ahead.
So I've been really struck in the conversation, again, thinking about this transition period. And we are, in the United States, we've seen, private sector unionization rates, they're under 7% now. So very few workers are organized in the private sector compared to historically, in the 50s, 35% were organized. And so it's not surprising that we are seeing now these other types of workers' rights organizations and workers' advocacy organizations. Jennifer kind of referenced the Fight for 15 and Our Walmart, and we see the Domestic Workers Alliance and others. And so the fact that they are taking up the strike mantle in their own way now, and it's different, is, again, I think we're in this really interesting period of flux, and I think it holds tremendous possibility. And I think the biggest thing is to make sure that, and I know they will, that the low-wage workers who are particularly vulnerable as they go out for the day or for more than a day are protected.
Final thought, Jennifer?
I'd like to say that, first of all, when we think about strikes for women, they've been about wages, of course, and working conditions, but also about bodily integrity, bodily respect on the job, self-determination, and autonomy. And that's being brought back in a very critical way. And secondly, that in the US, we have so much banished democratic rights from the economic realm, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. And we have to realize now, if we're going to talk about political democracy, we have to talk about economic democracy, and that these really are women's issues. And it's really exciting to see that women are taking this major step forward to begin to knit those back together and create a much broader set of citizenship rights for everyone and democratic participation.
Jennifer, I feel your excitement. For you, what's the takeaway that you want to leave everybody with?
Yes, I want people to know that this is the time, and that people clearly are ready across the world to build a decolonized, anti-racist feminism that rejects war, that rejects poverty, both as results of state violence, both as parts of state violence, and not only to just build this new feminism that is through this strike, but to reimagine and rebuild a society that can account for and make social provisions that properly value non-traditional labor, women's labor, and protect women and the most vulnerable.
Aijen?
I hope we're able to honor women workers in the economy tomorrow, celebrate and hold up the work that makes all of the work possible, and continue to up the ante as we show up for each other.
Do you know, guess what it's proven to me today is that we should have a lot more conversations about strikes. There's so much to talk about, and feminism and the women's movement as well. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Just going to wrap up with Malika.
I will end with this tweet from Laura out of North Carolina. She posted a picture of her 7-year-old's letter to her principal about this day. It reads, "I will not be at school on Wednesday, March 8th because of the Day Without Women. I will write letters to my representatives. I will do my work ahead of time. I think this day is important, and I hope you do too."
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.